The Works of the President Edwards, Volume 1. For Full Communion, Part 3rd. Objections Answered. Objection 1. The Scripture calls the members of the visible church by the name of disciples, scholars, or learners, and that suggests to us this notion of the visible church, that it is the school of Christ into which persons are admitted in order to their learning of Christ and coming to spiritual attainments in the use of the means of teaching, discipling, and training up, especially in the school. Now, if this be a right notion of the visible church, then reason shows that no other qualifications are necessary in order to bring members of this school than such a faith and disposition of mind as are requisite to persons putting themselves under Christ as their master and teacher and subjecting themselves to the orders of the school. But a common faith and moral sincerity are sufficient for this. Therefore, the Scripture leads us to suppose the visible church to be properly constituted of those who have these qualifications, though they are not saving faith and true piety. Answer. I own the Scripture calls the members of the visible church by the name of disciples, but I deny it therefore follows that the church which they are members of is duly and properly constituted of those who have not true piety. Because if this consequence was good, then it would equally follow that not only the visible, but also the invisible or mystical church is properly constituted of those who have not unfeigned faith and true piety. For the members of the mystical church as such, and to denote the special character of such, are called disciples. In Luke chapter 14 verses 26, 27, 33, and in John chapter 8 verse 31, in John chapter 13 verse 35, and John chapter 15 verse 8. This shows that in the argument I am answering, there is no connection between the premises and the conclusion. For the force of the objection consists in this, that the members of the visible church are called disciples in Scripture. This is the sum total of the premises, and if there be any connection between the premises and the conclusion, it must lie in the truth of this proposition. The church, whose members are called by the name of disciples, as signifying their state and quality as members of that society, that church is properly and fitly constituted, not only of persons truly pious, but of others that have merely a common faith and virtue. But this proposition we have seen is not true, and so there is no connection between the former and latter part of it, which are the same with the premises and conclusion of this argument. Number 2. Though I do not deny that the visible church of Christ may fitly be represented as a school of Christ where persons are trained up in the use of means in order to some spiritual attainments, yet it will not hence necessarily follow that this is in order to all good attainments, for it will not follow but that certain good attainments may be prerequisite in order to a place in the school. The Church of Christ is a school appointed for the training up Christ's little children to greater degrees of knowledge, higher privileges, and greater serviceableness in this world, and more of a meetness for the possession of their eternal inheritance. But there is no necessity of supposing that it is in order to fit them to become Christ's children or to be introduced into his family, any more than there is a necessity of supposing, because a prince puts his children under tutors, that therefore it must be in order to their attainment to be of the royal family. If it be necessary that there should be a Church of Christ appointed as a school of instruction and discipline, to bring persons to all good attainments whatsoever, then it will follow that there must be a visible church constituted of scandalous and profane persons and heretics, and all in common that assume the Christian name, that so means may be used with them in order to bring them to moral sincerity, and an acknowledgement of the Christian faith. Number 3. I grant that no other qualifications are necessary in order to bring members of that school of Christ, which is his visible church, than such as are requisite in order to their subjecting themselves to Christ as their master and teacher, and subjecting themselves to the laws and orders of his school. Nevertheless, I deny that a common faith and moral sincerity are sufficient for this, because none do truly subject themselves to Christ as their master, but such as, having their hearts purified by faith, are delivered from the reigning power of sin, for we cannot subject ourselves to obey two contrary masters at the same time. None do submit to Christ as their teacher, but those who truly receive him as their prophet to teach them by his word and spirit, giving up themselves to his teachings, sitting with Mary as little children at Jesus' feet to hear his word, and hearkening more to his dictates than those of their blind and deceitful lusts, and relying on his wisdom more than their own. Scripture knows nothing of an ecclesiastical school constituted of enemies of the cross of Christ, and appointed to bring such to be reconciled to him and submit to him as their master. Neither have they who are not truly pious persons any true disposition of heart to submit to the laws and orders of Christ's school, the rules which his word prescribes to all his scholars, such as to love their master supremely, to love one another as brethren, and to love their book, an example, their Bible, more than vain trifles and amusements, yea, above gold and silver, to be faithful to the interests of the master and of the school, to depend on his teachings, to cry to him for knowledge, above all their gettings to get understanding, etc. Number 4. Whatever ways of constituting the church may be to us seem fit, proper, and reasonable. The question is, not what constitution of Christ's church seems convenient to human wisdom, but what constitution is actually established by Christ's infinite wisdom. Doubtless, if men should set their wits to work and proceed according to what seems good in their sight, they would greatly alter Christ's constitution of his church to make it more convenient and beautiful, and would adorn it with a vast variety of ingenious inventions, as the Church of Rome has done. The question is, whether the school of Christ which they talk of, made up very much of those who pretend to no experiences or attainments, but what constitutes their being enemies of Christ in their hearts, and who in reality love the vilest lust better than him, be that Church of Christ which is in the New Testament, is denomination, his city, his temple, his family, his body, etc., by which names the visible Church of Christ is there frequently called. I acknowledge that means of Christ's appointment are to be used with those who are Christ's enemies and do not profess themselves any other, to change their hearts and bring them to be Christ's friends and disciples. Such means are to be used with all sorts of persons, with Jews, Mohammedans, heathens, with nominal Christians that are heretically or vicious, the vain, the intemperate, the unclean, and all other enemies of Christ. And these means to be used constantly and laboriously. Scandalous persons need to go to school to learn to be Christians as much as other men. And there are many persons who are not morally sincere, who, from selfish and sinister views, do consent ordinarily to go to church, and so be, in the way of the use of means. And none sought to forbid them thus going to Christ's school, that they may be taught by him in the ministry of the gospel. And yet it will not follow that such a school is the Church of Christ. Human laws can put persons, even those who are very vicious, into the school of Christ in that sense. They can oblige themselves consistently to be present at public teaching, and attend in the means of grace appointed by Christ and dispensed in his name. But human laws cannot join men to the Church of Christ and make them members of his bodies. End of Objection 1, having been read by Peter John Paresis.